Those introductions are always kind of embarrassing. So I'm going to introduce myself in a different way. Bojo, Anin, Sego, Moktthewenkwe, Ndesnikas, Wawashkesh, Ododem, Bodwe Wadmi Anishinaabe Kwe, Minwa, Wim Pedgogies Kwe and Dao, Shishi Baniyak and Debendagwas, Shawnee, Oklahoma, Ndonjaba, Michasagi Anishinaabe Ake Indida. So I introduce myself in this way, in what little I speak of the language of my ancestors, because it grounds me. It reminds me of who I truly am, and this way of introduction demonstrates accountability, authenticity, and relationality. By introducing myself in this way, I'm all of a sudden accountable to all of my relations, because in that introduction, I mentioned my family's community, Shishibaniak of Shawnee, Oklahoma. I mentioned my clan, Deer Clan. I mentioned my ancestors, Potawatomi and Anishinaabe, French, and a smattering of other European ancestry. And so I'm accountable to all of them as I speak. Human and more than human. And I know that these teachers stand beside me today, and in my classrooms and in my lecture halls, and as I do this earth walk. So by introducing myself in this way, I embody authenticity and remind myself to speak and teach only of what I know from my lived experience and my teachers. And I introduce myself in this way also to communicate to you where I come from on the land and waters of Turtle Island, and thus where my knowledges originate and what my responsibilities are. So I live on as an uninvited guest in Michasagi Anishinaabe territory. I have a long-standing and really deep relationship with the Great Lakes. And generations of my family have been impacted by settler colonialism and the Bodwe-Wadmi diaspora. Okay, this was working. Technology, right? Right, it was. Thank you, Derek. Okay. So this practice of introducing myself really illustrates, I think, Indigenous ways of being and knowing, and our worldview. And it's connected to kindness and care, and I'll try to weave that throughout my talk today. This practice is also a reminder that our words are powerful and must be carefully considered and used because of our accountability, our relationality, our responsibility, and the foundational teachings that guide my way of being. So thank you to Kyle, thank you to all of you who are sitting here listening to me struggle through this. I appreciate your patience, as this is the first public talk I've done since March of 2020, so it's wonderfully intimidating to see three-dimensional people in front of me instead of, faces in boxes or silent black boxes. We all know that, right? We've all experienced that. But what I'm going to speak about this morning is really kind of my musings regarding cultivating embodied learning and pedagogies of kindness and care. Jawen Jagewin Minwa Kanawe Nindawak. That is kindness and care in Anishinaabe Mowin. I'm going to speak, of course, from my perspective and share an overview of some foundational Bodwe-Wadmi Anishinaabe concepts and teachings that ground my ways of being, knowing, and my ways of teaching. And I understand that some of what I might share, or some of what I share, might be new to you. And I want to acknowledge that these concepts and these teachings are rich and deep, and they're richer and deeper than we have time to explore this morning. Yes. Bodwe-Wadmi Anishinaabe ways of knowing and being center relationship. Relationship with the land, the water, the cosmos, and the more than human beings of creation. This also involves centering concepts of reciprocity, responsibility, and then applying both of them respectfully to all of these relationships. Indigenous knowledges are relational in origin and transmission. Our ways of knowing are place-based and relationship-based, and our ways of knowing carry ethical responsibilities to simultaneously share our knowledges and protect our knowledges. Our ways of knowing and being are relevant to all aspects of our lives, including teaching with kindness and care. Indigenous pedagogies have many commonalities with active learning approaches and involve teaching through narrative or story, an oral tradition, including sometimes song and ceremony, learning through visiting, through observation, and experiential learning, which we call learning by doing. Oh, interesting. This happens to me in lecture too. There's supposed to be a little bit of a diagram here around these words, but somehow it doesn't translate from PowerPoint to Office 365. So imagine that there is, above land, water, and cosmos, there's kind of the curvature of the earth. And then all of these words are stacked in layers. And there's a big divide underneath practices, because this is illustrating the Potawatomi worldview. And what you see, what we see, if we're not embedded in that worldview, is the practices. And this is the biocultural framework that we use in the Indigenous Environmental Studies and Sciences courses at Trent University. So like Indigenous people globally, our culture is intimately tied to the land and the water and the cosmos. And if this diagram was here, you'd see this really nice little cool green line that shows that connection. Our relationship with and responsibility to Pedgogies, or the earth, our mother, the earth, and to all of the beings that we reside here with is one of humility. For we as Anishinaabe, as humans, are the last to arrive to walk on the earth. And this belief originates from our oral tradition, from our stories. And it guides our relationality, our responsibility, as well as our ways of knowing and teaching. Our worldview involves values and ethics that are guided by foundational teachings, and our relational ways of walking in the world center responsibility and reciprocity. All of these components of our worldview inform our practices, our way of living Moktthewenkwe, and our ways of teaching and mobilizing knowledge. And as a Bodwe-Wadmi Anishinaabe, as a Potawatomi Anishinaabe woman, I'm immersed in these practices. And having really the privilege of developing and delivering Indigenous Environmental Studies and Sciences courses within the Chani-Winjack School for Indigenous Studies at Trent and within the School of the Environment, it continues my immersion in these practices because I seize this opportunity and take freedom to teach using indigenous pedagogies and anti-colonial or decolonial approaches. And so our foundational teachings guide me in this. I have to have an anchor somewhere, right? The 7 ancestral teachings, which are also known as the 7 grandfather or 7 grandmother teachings of love, truth, honesty, respect, wisdom, humility, and bravery, are that ethical framework for living Manoba Moktthewenkwe, living that good life in a good way. So let's explore a little bit about how I apply these to teaching with kindness and care. So beginning with love, like everything begins with love, right? And the connection of love to care and kindness, I think, is obvious and doesn't need any explanation. But the connection of truth and honesty do. By applying truth and honesty in our communication, we demonstrate kindness. Being honest, truthful, and transparent in our relationships express care and demonstrate kindness. So the teaching of wisdom reminds us that to cherish knowing is to understand wisdom. To understand our own limitations is to apply wisdom. And to live our lives using our inherent gifts requires wisdom. So then humility. And humility not in the context of ego, rather within a context of equity. And this is tied again back to our oral tradition and our relationality, because as the last beings to arrive here on earth, we're no more important or knowledgeable than our older relatives. They are our teachers and our sustainers. And we as educators are no more important and perhaps knowledgeable than our students. And circle back to respect. We hold respect for all of our relations, for our students, for our teachers, human and more than human, and for the gifts and the knowledges that our students bring to our learning communities. Let me wrap up with bravery, because I think we all have to be brave. We have to embody bravery, and so do our students, to hear, accept, and act upon constructive criticism, and then to self-reflect and work to be innovative, adaptive, kind, and caring in our teaching. The next foundational teaching that I want to briefly touch on are the 7 stages of life. And I'm including this because understanding where we all are in our life journey and understanding where our students are in their life journey can help us create that pedagogy of kindness and care. So ideally, our lives progress through these 7 stages, beginning with, the formative years of infancy and move through childhood. And then after puberty into our teenage years, flow into that stage of and some of our students are in this phase of life, right? But most university students, I think, are in this next stage, this wandering and wondering. Traveling, leaving home to go to university, wondering about their identity, wondering about what their purpose in life is, what should their academic discipline be. And we meet them here, either in this stage of wandering and wondering or fast and crazy living. We meet them here as educators, as mentors, and as learners. And then those following 3 stages of life are really where most of us as educators, professors, curriculum developers are living within. Adulting. Raising a family, being dedicated and committed to our work, or maybe we're in the wisdom stage of life. We've raised our family. We're looking back over those stages of life that we have progressed through, and we're sharing our wisdom and our lived experience with our children, with our grandchildren, and with our students. And then professors emeriti are the elders, right? They move into that elder stage of life and teach and mentor on a deeper level. And I share this because I believe that understanding where we are in our life journey and where our students might be in theirs allows us as educators to apply our lived experience, our inherent gifts, and our knowledge in meeting our students where they are. These understandings support our relationships not only with our students, but with our colleagues and with ourselves, and provide opportunity for reciprocity and fulfilling our responsibilities with care and kindness and relevance. I'm gonna take a drink of water here. Why is it that our mouths always get dry when we talk? But I wanted to pause for just a second to create space for you to consider these teachings, to begin to connect them to your own worldview, to your beliefs, to your values, to your attitudes, and to your relationships. And I want to elaborate a bit on circles of relationality and responsibility from an Anishinaabe perspective. First, from the human context, which is connected to our beliefs and values. Because as spirits in a human vessel, we experience 4 realities through the 4 aspects of our being: mind, body, spirit, and emotion. And our first responsibility to ourselves is to continually work towards balancing these 4 aspects, balancing these 4 realities. And this balance is needed for us to live in a good way, in a healthy way, that allows us to promote kindness and care. And it holds space for us to uphold our responsibilities to our relatives, including our students. So as teachers and educators, creating curriculum and assignments and activities that allow our students to balance these 4 realities, displays care for their well-being, and create space for them to embody their learning. If they're balanced, they can take on that new knowledge, that new wisdom that they're gaining by participating in our classes and walk with it. We have an expression of wearing your teachings, actually putting your teachings on and walking with them. And as spirits in a human vessel, our reciprocal relationships extend beyond ourselves to family, to clan, to community, to nation. And within the spiral of time, our reciprocal relationships connect us and speak of our responsibility and our accountability to the past, to the future, and here, this moment in the present. And so this also speaks to our responsibility and our relationship to generations yet to come, and to our ancestors, and to all of those other beings of creation. So think back to that non-existent drawing, that framework of the biocultural framework, and the indigenous worldview that I spoke about really briefly. And I want to work to connect these circles of responsibility and relationship to that framework. Let's see if I can do this. Okay. So if we reorient those concentric circles and we add a vertical axis to illustrate that intimate connection to the land and to the water and to the cosmos and to spirit and to all of our relationships, you begin to understand the complexity of the relationality that can guide, or that guides my teaching. And then if we add an additional axis to illustrate our relationship with the four directions and the teachings and the beings associated with the East, the South, the West, and the North, you can then again start to see even more multidimensionality of these relationships and responsibilities that can guide ways of being and teaching and kindness and care. So realizing that I am in reciprocal relationship with and have responsibility to the land, the water, the cosmos, my ancestors, generations yet to come, the four parts of my being, and all of those other relatives, all of those other beings that I reside with here on the earth that sustain me and sustain my children and my family and my clan and my community and my nation, I don't think I have any other choice except for to operate from gratitude and with kindness and care. Bodwe Wadmi Anishinaabe ways of knowing and being, as I've said multiple times, center relationship. And relationship is the origin of Indigenous knowledges. And I share this with you because I understand that in addition to exploring pedagogies of kindness and care, that many of you are working to be inclusive of Indigenous knowledge systems in your curriculum and your course content. So relationship with the land, the water, and the sky world, relationship with the beings of creation, and relationship with spirit, all inform and are ways of transmitting Indigenous knowledges. I want to check my time here, take another drink of water. And I think I have a few moments to share examples of what I mean from learning from our relatives, learning from the land, learning from the other than human beings, and learning from the knowledge that's embedded in the cosmos. Our oldest relatives, the rocks, are considered our grandfathers and our grandmothers. They're our teachers. They are our elders. And they hold the knowledge of the earth, of Shkakmikwe, our mother, and her lived experience. Their stories are visual. And I think that the geoscience discipline of stratigraphy really focuses on understanding and learning to read those visual narratives that the rocks, our grandparents, share with us. These efficient, quiet containers of life energy, seeds. Seeds are our elders. Seeds are our teachers because seeds demonstrate the sacredness of water, the sacredness of life, and nurturing relationships. Think about what they have witnessed. Seeds have witnessed the journey of us as people. They acknowledge our histories, they hold our histories, and they've nourished countless generations of our ancestors and will, with reciprocal kindness and care, nourish generations yet to come. Seeds hold stories, not only of the people that care for them, but of the land from which they grow. Another example that relates to our stories, that we are made of stardust. We come from the stars and the sky world. Our ancestors walk Jibai Makan, the Milky Way. And they reside in the star world, in the sky world, as stars and constellations. And we consider these constellations our relatives because we know it's our ancestors that have grouped themselves in ways to tell stories that will guide our life within the seasonal cycle. They care for us from up there. They teach us, and they're role models for our own ways of teaching. Our grandmother, the moon, she cares for the water on the earth and the water within our bodies and all of the bodies of other living things. And our grandfather, the sun, holds that fire that we all have inside of ourselves. And that's inside of Shkakmikwe, our mother. Going to shift gears a little here and really start to talk about or share what I'm thinking about cultivating embodied learning and cultivating relationships. And of course, maintaining relationships, any relationship that we're in requires using kindness and care. And cultivating and maintaining relationships require that understanding of ourselves so that we can acknowledge others and begin to understand the gifts that they bring to our human-to-human relationships, whether it's a friendship, a romantic relationship, a work relationship, a teacher-student relationship. Everyone brings something. And this applies to building a learning environment and a learning community that I believe facilitates embodied learning. I believe that when our students are seen for who they are and acknowledged for what they know, a door's opened. And I believe that when we as educators meet our students where they are, that door opens wider. And when we as educators can build a reciprocal, respectful relationship with our students, that door kind of becomes a portal to embodied learning. And you know, these practices might seem obvious and it's easy to talk about them, but it's also easy for them to slip through the cracks when we are faced with the continual academic pressures of increasing productivity, publishing and researching. Our focus, we're drawn in so many different directions. But to cultivate embodied learning, I think we have to remember, extend and expand what we did and what we learned during the height of the pandemic. Because in that time of that great pivot from in-person learning to remote learning, we in solidarity applied kindness in care in kind of a crisis-induced trend. We had to do this for the well-being of ourselves and the well-being of our students. And I think the majority of our students responded and reciprocated with kindness and care. So let's start to commit this as a permanent approach to teaching and to create a culture of care. And I think a culture of care is vital for students and educators and for embodied learning. And I think that this includes, again, from my perspective, it includes flexibility. So flexibility around deadlines and around ways to participate in class. So the flexibility of deadlines requires us as educators to establish clear boundaries and a clear extension policy. It creates opportunity for us to offer 1 or 2 flexible deadlines on assignments. And both an extension policy and flexible deadlines allow our students to learn and practice, hopefully, time management. In a culture of care, I think there's a diversity of opportunities for students to participate in lecture and seminars. And again, this goes back to meeting students where they're at. This means encouraging introverts and those with social anxiety to contribute to class discussion via online chats, discussion boards, or emails, rather than facing that intimidating prospect of speaking in public. And to create a culture of care, we as educators, we need to up our listening game. We need to check in with students at the start of every class. We need to acknowledge their challenges and somehow find time to increase our availability for visiting with students, whether it be through in-person or virtual meetings, through office hours, or a simple ask me anything session. But, you know, in upping our game, in listening to our students, we need to be conscious of that boundary between educator and counselor, because sometimes it gets pretty fuzzy in those listening sessions. So we need to have on the ready, of course, recommendations for support services inside and outside our academic institutions. Applying kindness and care means to work to lessen anxiety and stress for us and for our students. And we can do this as we build our courses. A Friday 5 p.m. assignment deadline rather than a 11:59 p.m. assignment deadline sets the stage for perhaps downtime over the weekend. Considering an assignment-based rather than an exam-based assessment approach can go a long ways to lessen anxiety and stress, as can the use of a creative and scaffolded progression of assignments throughout the term that are based on learning outcomes and critical thinking. And we can also provide options for our students to express their gained knowledge. In addition to writing, we can offer the choice of creating a podcast, a photo voice formats, voice thread, or video as a way of sharing what they've learned, a way of sharing their takeaways. It's important, I think, to remember that our learning communities consist of human beings with complicated lives first and students second. So to create a culture of care is to encourage student self-care and well-being and make personal and family and community well-being a priority. But to do this, we must inspire and model transparency. We have to be vulnerable sometimes in front of our students, so we as educators can accommodate our students' well-being needs. So encouraging breaks and motivating students to get outside. Better yet, build getting outside into our courses. You know, that encouraging them to eat well and to check on one another, whether it's in a weekly email or at the end of lecture, at the end of seminar, is a way to build a culture of care. And we can apply that ancestral teaching of humility by creating a circle of equity. And so what I mean here is by adapting or maybe kind of upending that hierarchy of the professor as the expert who lectures to students, sitting, listening passively in rows, and create a circle of equity because there's no hierarchy in a circle and everyone is seen. There's no beginning, there's no end, and there can be a equitable distribution of power when we acknowledge that everyone in our classrooms and lecture halls is a learner and an educator. That circle of equity encourages everyone to center themselves within reciprocal, respectful relationships. Let's work to infuse kindness and care in our teaching. And kindness and care, I believe, are kind of inherent in Indigenous pedagogies. Those reciprocal, respectful relationships include a responsibility to recognize and uplift those inherent gifts of all the members of our learning community. Acts of kindness include recognition and inclusion. I believe we have a responsibility as educators to recognize and include a plurality of knowledge systems and worldviews within our courses, because doing so allows our students to see themselves and find relevance in our course content. I've learned from my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Dan Longboat, to acknowledge students' participation and attendance with expressions of gratitude. A simple thank you for coming to class today. I know that you're busy. I know that the weather's nice and you could be outside, but you chose to be here. Thank you. And checking in with them when they're absent. This is really relationship maintenance. It's kindness and care, and it's motivation for students to come. And then concluding a learning session with expressions of gratitude for students' contributions, for acknowledging the thinking and the bravery that goes in to taking that time and effort to fully engage in class. That's an act of kindness. And then reciprocity. So reciprocity, from my perspective, is a Bodwe-Wadmi Anishinaabeg practice. So when we receive new knowledge in the form of teaching or a material gift or the gift of someone's time, we demonstrate reciprocity. And this can be formalized by our practice of a giveaway, which is something that I do at the end of the term in all of my classes. This is what it looks like. My workshop leaders, my seminars, and me, we stand within that circle of our students or in front of the lecture hall. And we each speak from the heart. We take turns, we talk to our students about what they have given us, what we have learned. And then we literally hold a giveaway. We give away chocolate and coffee gift cards and Trent University swag, you know, books and learning supplies as an expression of reciprocity for what we have received as educators from our students. And I think that this is an act of kindness, and it embodies reciprocal, respectful relationships, and it models responsibility. Let's pause for a moment. Again, I have to have more water. And not spill it all over my speaking notes. Been there, done that. Let's turn our focus inward. So as you walk away from this keynote and you start to think about what I've shared this morning, and you begin to process this experience, I respectfully ask you to apply the 7 ancestral teachings of truth, honesty, bravery, and wisdom, and hold up the mirror. Reflect on your own teaching philosophies and methods. From my perspective, holding up that mirror involves flipping our focus from normalized expectations of students to focusing on examining and enhancing our expectations of ourselves as educators. So I encourage you to hold up that mirror. We can operationalize honesty and truth and wisdom by being transparent with our students regarding our intentions of a course structure, of course design, and the purpose of the assignments that we're requiring them to do. It helps with buy-in. You're going to get to do this assignment, and this is what you're going to gain from it. This is why it's here. It's purposeful. It's not just busy work. We can be brave by pushing ourselves to become wise through reciprocity, through inclusion, through flexibility, and creating those circles of equity. We can cultivate relevant, transferable, and embodied learning for all members of our learning communities through pedagogies of kindness and care. Hold up that mirror, right? So Miu, this concludes my words, and I want to say miigwech to all of you for listening and considering what I'm sharing with you, and considering the uses of Indigenous pedagogies and pedagogies of kindness and care. Teaching and learning through narratives, through visiting, through observation, and experiential learning are components of Indigenous ways of knowing and being, as well as active learning approaches. So now we're going to shift to learning and visiting with two of your Waterloo colleagues. We're going to engage in what we call a kitchen table conversation. So as you imagine the drawing in the biocultural framework, imagine that we are sitting here around a kitchen table. Maybe we're doing some beadwork, some handwork, we're having some tea. And while we're visiting here in person in this informal setting, we're going to continue to build our relationship. We've met virtually a couple times, and we're going to learn from each other's lived experience, applying pedagogies of kindness and care. In other words, by witnessing this conversation, Leslie and Kelly are going to help all of us hold up the mirror. So I think we have a mic. You got it? All right. And I'm going to take my notes over here.
I think it's good. Okay, it's good now.
You're good to go. You can, if you guys would both introduce yourselves, and are we going to have feedback? Okay.
So I'm Kelly Lorla, and I'm Sami and Irish, and I'm settler. Mawaji Anazakanechike. Nindijnakas, my spirit name is Moving Light. I was given that name by Algonquin Sundance Chief Harry Snowboy. And at this time in my life, I think that name really fits for me in terms of trying to shine light in places maybe where conversations are difficult, hard to look at. And so I hope that I do that in a good way, in a kind way. And Kitchener is where I live, and Kirkland Lake is Undayon, home where I was born on Treaty 61 territory, the Robinson-Huron Treaty. And I just want to acknowledge that my Sami grandfather from northern Finland, you know, he was a colonized Indigenous man. And when he chose to settle in Canada in the 1920s, he became part of the colonial project. And so I acknowledge that I carry colonization and being colonized and learning how to decolonize in my life and in my role as an educator. I'm a sessional lecturer, a long time, of 15 years in the Renison University College, primarily in social work.
Miigwech Kelly. Wapagan Bashkan Kwani Nadishnikas, Wabaman Takaranto Treaty 6 in Dunjaba, Gawin Dundem, Métis Kwe Indau. My name is Leslie Wexler. I was gifted the name Flowers Blooming from Terry Swan, a traditional healer in Cree territory, and I am from a place called Wabamun, which is in Alberta in Treaty 6. And the word Wabamun is translated into English as mirror lake, but in the Oji Cree original, it means a place where you see yourself clearly. So I carry a lot of that with me. So I'm a Métis woman. So I'm a settler Indigenous woman blend and biracial, and so carry the responsibility of seeing both sides of myself clearly.
Go ahead.
Should I go ahead? Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm going to actually use the board. I was thinking I'm going to make a slide, and I thought, no, I don't want to make a slide. I'm going to use the board. Okay, so I'm going to just talk just for a bit with Barbara, with Kelly, with all of you, about some of my experiences that I've been having in health sciences and curriculum design here at Waterloo. So what we've been doing in health sciences is looking at something called cultural safety. And cultural safety is, or has become, a Western paradigm that has a full process. But I think of it as in relation to creating pedagogies of care and kindness. So here's what the Western paradigm process of critical thinking around cultural safety looks like. At the top, you have cultural awareness. Cultural awareness is that we recognize that we're different from other cultures, and that there's similarities that will exist between cultures and differences, and that learning about things and histories like the impact and importance of the Indigenous history in Canada are all part of like the foundations of cultural awareness. This creates a greater level of cultural sensitivity. Cultural sensitivity is when we become aware of our biases and we begin to see the influences of our culture and have the acknowledgement that we are all carrying our own assumptions, which then this responsibility leads us to want to engage in cultural competencies. The word I don't like the most, but cultural competencies as it is. Cultural competencies are about reducing our assumptions once we can see our biases. And if we can engage in this process reflexively back and forth like a pendulum, we'll gain greater cultural humility. It kind of works both ways, all the way around. On a good day, you might be like thinking, oh, I've got the cultural humility really down. The next day, you could be right back to, I don't know anything. And so it's this kind of circular process that works in both ways. Like, we've got it, we don't got it. What am I doing here? That's my English literature degree right there. I can't even spell humility. Okay, so humility is basically the embodied lifelong journey of reflecting on how we can change our experience inside the classroom, experience and influence as teachers with others, and understanding that listening inside of our pedagogies helps us to understand how to care and be kind to others in ways that respects them in our interactions. So that's the Western paradigm. The Indigenous side of this is for me to tell you some of my own stories about what's happened as I've engaged in this Western paradigm with the health sciences. The first thing was the cultural awareness. I was designing with the professors, and in the meantime, I was also learning from elders. And one of the teachings that I was receiving was through the Anishinaabe 8 Fires prophecy. And then in the teaching, there was a suggestion that with the 8th fire kind of states simply that there will come a time where we all have a choice between life and death. And that in this elder teaching that we believe that in our collective wisdom journey, as a shared journey with settlers and Indigenous people, that it's leading us to multiple ways of knowing. And to choose multiple ways of knowing is to choose life. I found this like a hugely profound awareness building moment where I became aware that the most important thing was to share multiple ways of knowing. It seems so simple. I mean, I've always been someone who appreciates and supports interdisciplinarity. But in the moment I thought, yeah, interdisciplinarity, sure. Like cross disciplines, no problem. But then I started to think about how it could engage also with learning by engaging with others differently, learning by doing things with others differently. So the first thing that I was aware of in my work was I'm learning from the professors I work with, even though I am not a scientist. I'm actually an English literature Renaissance scholar. And so to work with scientists is immediately like, we are different, but I work with them and learn from them, and they learn from me. So we engage and learn in Western Indigenous knowledge's ways together as a multiple form of knowing. And then we think about how to offer it to students. If only all of our classrooms could be so interdisciplinary, if only all of our classrooms could be so culturally inclusive that we could respect sitting with one another and talking. My teaching around cultural sensitivity came from my daughter, and she said earlier in the week, "Hey Mom, let me tell you what I learned today." And I was like, I need to make dinner. I've got to get my son to basketball. I've got to get an article written. I've got to get to the meeting, a work meeting in 10 minutes. But sensitivity in this moment, I mean, it's easy with a child. Well, it's easy and it's not easy. It's easy with a child because you say, oh, no, I'm going to listen. And it's easy with a child to be like, later. So it really requires the space and time for listening to others. Is my assumption that whatever my small child has to say, not something that's really going to teach me anything. Like what they've learned today is probably I learned that a long time ago, and it's not a big deal. We can talk about that later, maybe before bed. But by that time, they've forgotten, they've moved on. They don't even remember they've said they've learned anything in the day. So I've got to know that I've got to seize the moment now. And so time and space are needed to identify and isolate with our students too. When they say, let me tell you what I learned today, that they are isolating their own ontological, epistemological, ethical, and logical knowledges. Like they are learning every time they interact in a way that makes them think, what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? So could you say to your students, let me tell you what I learned today, so that we could model a reciprocal practice where they could feel free to also say it back to us. Competency, I feel like I gotta keep going faster now. Competency is, I would call it, we all love the hive mind. One of the assignments we're making inside of one of these courses is, can the students create an assignment, or can the professor create an assignment where the students are going to redesign the course in the first week with 3 or 4 milestones to guide them, and then we will learn from them what they think the course is about, so that we can then understand how they're viewing the course, and then like a hive mind, share what everyone thought the course was going to be about, use the middle part of the course to learn different things, and then have them rewrite the course and redesign it at the end, so that we have practice a competency around of, we all just love to be in a hive mind. We actually like to collaborate. We like to spend time together. We like to think about these things. And then lastly, about humility. I have a really recent one, actually, which is related to the fact that I've just finished my PhD. And in this particular story, it's literally celebrated every single day. It was like yesterday and then the day before. Every time I say it, people are happy. I mean, I'm happy too. So for everyone who's holding a PhD or working towards a PhD or thinking or studying or as a student, what in your studies or your research do you truly, truly appreciate? Like, have a really deep appreciation for the knowledge that you've gained. How long did you need before you started to feel a really expanded sense of appreciation? So when I finished my PhD, they asked me, like, what do you want to speak about in the first 5 minutes of your defense? I just felt overwhelmed because when I thought back over the years, I was like just flooded with like the appreciation for everything I had actually gained. I'm a completely different person, I feel like. I've been transformed. How am I going to talk about this? So humility recognizes that appreciating something is actually the highest form of knowledge. Which means that everybody's got something. We just have to listen for it. Over to you.
Thank you, Leslie. I just also wanted to acknowledge that tomorrow is May 5th, Red Dress Day, and I wanted to honor the missing and murdered Indigenous women. And it just is, it's not just a day, and it's every day Indigenous peoples and their communities are looking for and missing women and girls, and also seeking justice. And I pray for justice between Indigenous and settler peoples so that we come together to address the incredible, staggering numbers of missing and murdered Indigenous women. So when I saw so many connections, Barbara, when you were, speaking earlier, and there were Indigenous knowledges that have formed such a basis for all of my teaching, big concepts or foundational knowledges of holism, interconnectedness, and relationships. From all of my work in listening to people and going to ceremonies and hearing teachers for close to 30 years, I formed a lot of my curriculum all around this idea of what makes up the whole, and how are all those parts in the whole connected to one another, and what is the relational aspects of all of those parts, including the humans or all of us learners that are in the curriculum. So right from planning the layout of the 12 weeks, the curriculum that goes with it, including how each week might unfold, and it's really formed the basis for my courses. It doesn't matter what I'm teaching. It's a variety of topics. Even when I do different workshops or community gatherings, I consider that. And they connect to also when I've listened to elders talk about their creation stories. And it's probably no surprise to you that all people have a creation story, how they came here, and what were the teachings that each creation story had about how to be in relationship with all others. I listened to a creation story told by Anishinaabe elder Onabinase, Jim Dumont, and he's a speaker talker. And so I've listened to a very short version, and even after 2 days, so 16 hours later, he could have gone further, and he has. But I took so many things out of those stories, and one of the huge ones that just touched me so deeply was when I listened to a lot of openings. Often people will talk about, our identity and how we're connected to a certain territory and to the people there, but also connected in giving gratitude and thanks to the standing people, the stone people, the plant people, the winged ones, the creepers, the crawlers, the flyers, the swimmers. Grandfather Sun, who lights our sky every day, even on a really dark, rainy day. Grandfather Sun is there, because without Grandfather, we would be frozen. To Grandmother Moon, who lights up our sky every night and pulls the tides of water and reminds us of the femininity in all of life. And to Father Sky, who upholds all of creation, and to our First Mother, who continues to provide to us and sustain all of life, and giving thanks to the water. So I think about that interconnectedness that comes through in those Thanksgivings, and how I'm reminded when I hear the creation story of how, I'm one of those beings. I'm one of the beings in all of creation. I think about the circle of life or the whole of life, and that we are all part of that. And what I heard Elder Onabinese say that Creator created all of the beings with kindness, with love. We've probably heard the words, God or Creator is love. And it really sat with me when Elder Onabinese said that, because I thought, well, if Creator is creating the spiders, the trees, the birds, and humans with love, then I'm a spark of Creator's kindness. And so how do I honor where I've come from, except to be kind? And then I've been taught, and it was mentioned too by Barbara, around this accountability and responsibility to all my relations. And so how do I do that? If I'm accountable, because they're all my relatives. May not like the spiders, but they're my relatives. And so how do I honor all of creation, and including the humankind? And then what is my responsibilities, my behaviors, my words, my actions, to maintain my relationships? Because if we're all in the circle of life, which is a bit of an equity teaching, if we're all in that circle of life, then how do we honor all of life and all our relatives in there? So then I end up bringing that into my classrooms with ethics. I think there's ethics to engage with to maintain our relationships. And it actually comes through being of kindness and care, but I don't define the ethics for my students. I ask them, what would allow you to be able to feel comfortable enough to share and participate in this course? And so I give them all opportunity to do that. And it's an activity. So we break up into groups, and each group will come up with they'll come up each with their own, and then we put together this collective. And so, because I think whole, interconnected in relationships, I put all of their words in the circles that you saw when Barbara was speaking. Is what are some of the ethics that are in the spirit domain? And I think, for me, it's quite natural to bring spirit into teaching, because it is the essence of how the teaching unfolds and the facilitation. So that could be about kindness, bringing an intention of kindness into the circle, respect, openness. And so students come up with those things. And then they don't know it in the beginning, but I organize again their ethics around emotions, relations. And what are the ethics in that place? Well, giving people time to process, where they are in the topic area, being supportive of people's points, not being negative in comments, watching language. And then there's a mental part of the learning part of the circle. And some of those are about asking, like, where did this knowledge come from that I have? What assumptions or biases do I have from this? And can I be open to other people's learning and perspectives? And then in the physical, the students come up with many different kinds, and I'll just mention a few. Of course, breaks, and that's so important, right, to rejuvenate during a 3-hour class, for example. And maintaining privacy and confidentiality for what we're sharing. So those are just some of the ethics, but I think it helps with maintaining the relationships that are within our classroom. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Is this my, oh, good, okay. I just wanted to make sure that you could hear me. Thank you both for really speaking and connecting to the concepts that I shared as well. And the thing that strikes me with both of what you said is letting students design a course, or letting students create that ethics of how the classroom is going to operate and how those relationships are going to be upheld requires us as educators to let go of control. And that can be a little scary, right? We don't know what's going to happen. So do either of you have ways to walk or guide instructors through that letting go of control?
The first experience I had in letting go of control was as a teaching assistant. My students always said to me, office hours does not work for them. I think they said it to me for 4 full years before I heard them, because I wasn't listening. I couldn't hear them. And so at a midpoint review, some point 4 years later, I asked, well, what would work? They said, could you contact us and let us contact you via WhatsApp? Could you meet us outside of your office hours? Could we meet just online? This was before the pandemic. Could we just have like an online FaceTime meeting? This required that I had to give the students my phone number in a lot of instances. And I thought, do I want to do that? I had the same issue with, I was like, am I a TA or am I a counselor? What's going to happen if I listen like this? But around year 6, I asked myself, am I willing to hear them? And so my listening had to acquire my own ability to become willing to hear them. And then I did. I allowed them to contact me via WhatsApp and FaceTime. And so by the time the pandemic actually came, I was ready. I was ready. I was already meeting and talking with students in mediated forms because that's what they wanted. And it didn't bite me. I don't have a bad experience to tell you. So that's where I let go of control.
Each time I do my classes, I do teach in circle, and sometimes it's a challenge because students are quite familiar with having desks. And when I was first starting the teaching and being taught by the elders about circle work, I did not use desks at all, and I would go in early to class, move all the tables away, and put them all in circles, or the chairs in a circle, and students sometimes would be surprised. But in one of my classes, probably, 6 or 7 years ago, we were doing a breakout activity, and students were using tables because they had to write down things on poster paper and then present. And so after the break, we came back into the full circle, and the students maintained the tables in front of themselves in the circle. I would say there were 2 tables that came into the circle, and the rest of the students were sitting in their chairs without anything in front of them. I actually have emphasized that listening to one another and responding ends up being more important than the notes. And so the learning activities and assignments aren't based on necessarily information that is conveyed in a factual kind of way through classroom environments. The information gets conveyed to students through other ways, like through learn and delivery of information. So when we come to class, they're coming together to share. So what happened is I had an instinct to say, remove the tables. And then I thought, no, I'm going to let go and let be. So I know that when I let be, the circle process has a energy and power of its own. And I let the students, I asked them, I said, I see tables in our circle. What do we need to do about this, if anything? And so students gave their perspectives, and because of the ethics established at the beginning, a lot of students said, we agreed that we wouldn't have any tables. And then others said, but I need a table for writing, for different reasons. So then we went again around and said, well, what could be the best options? And so we ended up coming up with a compromise that worked in that particular term. And so there were chairs with the flip-up tabletop piece. that students could use, and they still came in, you know, into that circle space. So it can be a little nerve-wracking, I think, as an instructor when you let go, but it's incredibly powerful to realize that students have great thoughts and perspectives that I might never have considered if I hadn't let go to let the circle determine that.
Miigwech. I realize that we have about 2 minutes, and I wanted to let go of control and ask you if you have any questions. Or I'll say what I do in lectures. I want to have 2 questions before we close class.
I have a question.
Oh, and there's a question up there.
My question is, why is it so frightening to ask a question?
Perhaps you can project from where you're at. So we'll see.
I just couldn't see you not have a question. So I had one that was in my mind all the time. How do you balance? I'm Jean Richardson, and I'm retired, but I'm with the Department of Earth Sciences in the Earth Science Museum here. And how do you manage or wait out the point of having a self-directed course where students decide on the ethics and they decide on the content and the design of the course, with requirements for professional schools and professional organizations who will say you must have these courses and these courses must contain this content in order for you to be a practicing geologist or geoscientist or optometrist or pharmacist or engineer?
Are you able to walk and talk at the same time, Leslie?
You want me to answer that?
Sure, I do.
Oh, well, let me just...
You've got the experience in that, perhaps.
Well, I don't know. You're the engineer. What do I think about that? I think that not every class has to be something that has all the accreditation standards in it. If all of the classes are like that, does that increase the stress and anxiety on the students? Yeah. I guess that would be my first thought. And then I guess after that would be like, what could be designed to reduce the stress and anxiety of the accreditation? That's the course you want to focus on.
Or presenting those requirements to the students when they have to design the course, right? So, okay, we need to include this and we need to include that. How are we going to do it? I think there's one more question and time for one question. Now that we're warmed up, right?
Yeah. Since you need a second question, that's why I just thought to frame a question. Thank you very much. It was a very enlightening presentation. Kindness and care, those 2 words are very reflective. Not only I feel that it's not only specific to indigenous, to the Canadian or something like that, but anywhere in the world, those 2 words, our ancestors give us. And I was just reflecting when you're presenting, there are 7 ancestral knowledges. There are 7 things, and when you made a circle and made 7 things, and there was one empty one was missing there, and I was thinking what could be the one I was wondering. Then I came to a thought that, hey, as a teacher is nothing but a guide or a mentor, something. Maybe the 8th one could fit there as a guide or mentor or something like that. I was thinking as a 8th part of that.
That eighth
Thank you.
section of the circle, right? Thank you for reflecting on that, and thank you for noticing that. That's actually part of the teaching, and that that one segment, that eighth segment that's colored dark or black, represents that unknown. And so there's so many teachings around that. That's a kind of a humility teaching, in that we don't know everything and we can never know anything. And there's that same section in the 7 stages of life, in that it sits between new life as babies and elders, the elder stage of life. And that's the unknown of where the elders go when they cross over and where the babies come from. That they're both close to the medicine, they're both close to that unknown. That's part of the deeper, the deeper thinking of those teachings. Thank you for that question, Miigwech. I think we're out of time, right, Kyle? Thank you so much.